We're going to review a variety of nervous system models, most of the ones that we went through, if not all of the ones we went through in lab. So here we're first going to look at a neuron. We're going to look at a neuron. In this model here you can see the dendrites. And then you can see the cell body. And within the cell body you can see the nucleus. Up here, dendrites, cell body, nucleus. The long extension down the center here is called the axon. It's called the axon. These little things right here are little mitochondria. We'll talk about what their function is in the neuron when we get to that physiology in lecture. Wrapped around the axon is the myelin sheath. Now the myelin sheath actually should be a white coloring. They didn't do a good job of picking a good color for this, but this should actually be white. It's actually fatty tissue that makes up this myelin sheath. So when you look at different parts of the nervous system, when you see white matter, you know it's long extensions of neurons that are wrapped in myelin sheath. The last structure you need to know, which remember is not in the lab packet, is the node of Ranvier, and that's a gap between the myelin sheath. And again, we'll talk about its role. When we get to the physiology in lecture. So again, on this one, dendrites, remember these little things are actually the ends of other neurons, and there's a synapse there, so don't let these confuse you. So dendrites here, these extensions, cell body, nucleus, here's your axon, and then there's your myelin sheath, and then again up here you can see the nodes of Ranvier. Now let's look at the brain. Let's look at the parts of the brain that you have to know. First of all, this is the cerebellum. This whole structure up here is the cerebrum, and if you remember, the cerebrum is broken down into lobes, and these should be relatively easy because they have the same names that the bones of the skull or the cranium had. So this is the frontal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, this is the occipital lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. So that should be relatively easy for you to remember as long as you learned it the first time. Now when we look at a cross-section of the brain, it looks something like this. I'm going to go through each of these structures. This is the corpus callosum. It's marked with the blue. Okay. Right below that is the lateral ventricle. And then we have the thalamus. Below that we have the hypothalamus. Below that we have the pituitary gland. Down here in the brainstem we have the pons and the medulla oblongata. And up here behind the thalamus we have the pineal gland. Back here is the cerebellum. One more time, the corpus callosum, the lateral ventricle, the thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pons, medulla oblongata. Behind the thalamus is the pineal gland, and then you have the cerebellum. Now looking at an inferior view of the brain, you have the olfactory nerve, which is your first cranial nerve. So you have the nerve here. Here you have your second cranial nerve, which is the optic nerve. Remember, these have been cut. They would actually come to the back of each eye, obviously. Underneath the pituitary gland here, where the optic nerves cross, is called the optic chiasm. Okay, so that's difficult to see, but in a lot of these, remember, the pituitary gland has fallen off, so you can see that crossing pretty easy. And here's actually part of the second optic nerve, and again, they'd come here and cross, and that would be the optic chiasm. So you have the olfactory nerve, optic nerve, pituitary gland, and optic chiasm. Okay, let's look at a cross-section of the spinal cord. I'll show you two different models so you're comfortable with using more than one. This is the spinal nerve. Remember, there's one on this side. Remember, spinal nerves are mixed nerves. They contain both sensory and motor neurons. When those types of neurons split, you get into the roots. So this is the dorsal root, and it contains sensory neurons. This is the ventral root, and it contains motor neurons. Now remember, the way to tell the difference between the dorsal and ventral root is to look for this structure right here, which remember we call the dorsal root ganglion. So what you have here, remember, is the cell bodies of sensory neurons. And since those cell bodies are thicker than, say, axons and dendrites, it causes this little bulge. This group of cell bodies causes a bulge, and again we call it the dorsal root ganglion. So that's usually the easiest way to remember the difference between the dorsal, or to identify the difference between the dorsal and the ventral side. Remember here, okay, we have the horns. Okay, we have the horns. So you have the ventral horn and you have the dorsal horn. This is gray matter, so it contains cell bodies, short axons, and short dendrites that don't have myelin sheath wrapped around them. So again, if you know the ventral root, you got the ventral horn, dorsal root. The rest of this around the gray matter is white matter or tracts. And remember, these are elevator systems. Some of them take signals from the brain down, other ones take it from the spinal cord up. So this is a elevator system to and from the brain, and it allows the brain to communicate. One way it can communicate with the body. So again, this is the white matter tracts around that gray matter. This is just a different model of a spinal cord. Spinal nerve, here's your dorsal root ganglion, so that's your dorsal root. Here's your ventral root. Here is your gray matter. Okay, so those are your ventral horns. These are your dorsal horns. The white matter here doesn't look as white because they've painted in some of the specific tracks, but that's your white matter. Okay. So pretty much the same type of model. I just wanted you to see more than one example of what the spinal cord model could be. So what you need to do, oops, we need a little bit more. Sorry, thought we were done. Let's look at the full size body of the spinal cord. Up here, you just have the cerebrum circled and the cerebellum. You have 4 different plexuses that you need to know. The highest is the cervical plexus. That should be pretty easy to remember, because remember we talked about the spinal vertebrae, and those were the cervical. Okay, so this is the cervical plexus. This is called the brachial plexus, okay, which is going to send a lot of motor neurons down to the arms. And when you get down here, and I know you can't see the hand, you see 2 nerves that you need to know. This is on the lateral side, and you should remember on the lateral side is going to be the radial nerve, and on the medial side is going to be the ulnar nerve. And again, this is in the anatomical position when that thumb facing outward or lateral. So again, cervical plexus, brachial plexus, radial nerve, ulnar nerve. Looking at the bottom, the body, again, here's just a reiteration of the arm. You can't see, you can tell that's not a thumb, but you can't see the thumb out here. But that, remember, you follow that thumb, and that's going to be the radial, and this is going to be the ulnar. Down here, we have the lumbar plexus, and one major nerve that you need to know coming off that lumbar plexus is the femoral nerve. It's pretty easy to remember because this is the femur, so you just follow that. Here you have the sacral plexus, and the big nerve that you've probably all heard about even before this class is the sciatic nerve, and that will branch all the way down to your toes. So if there's issues up here like herniated discs and so on, it can affect you, your ability to feel things, and your ability to move certain muscles can be affected if there's something blocking signals to and from or through that sciatic nerve. So sacral plexus, lumbar plexus. The lumbar plexus is up higher. Lumbar plexus here with the femoral. This is the sacral plexus, okay, and that's a sciatic nerve. Okay, so make sure you review all those models. Make sure you're comfortable with that. Make sure you take the practice test and work on the worksheets before you take the real test.